I am heavy
bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Whitstadt, and you were listening to Heavy Bored, and we're recording this on December 14th, 2024. My guest today is Funke Afolabi-Brown. Funke is a triple board certified pediatric pulmonologist and sleep medicine physician. She is an academic clinician and assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where she is the associate program director of the Pulmonary and Sleep Medicine Fellowships. She's a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. She's a public speaker, a writer, publishing regular articles about her sleep research and clinical practice. She's an educator and an entrepreneur, founding Restful Sleep MD, her own clinical care, research, and personalized sleep planning and coaching business, where she gives a personalized, holistic focus to clients and patients. She owns and operates a YouTube channel at Dr. Funke Brown, where she offers everything from sleep advice to in-depth looks at her current research and best practices. And on top of all that, listeners, Dr. Afolabi-Brown is also a writer. Her book is called Beyond Tired, out just this past October, and of course is linked below, listeners. The subtitle reads, A Sleep Physician's Guide to Solve Your Child's Sleep Problems for Good. And it is about, you guessed it, listeners, sleeping and sleep patterns. And more importantly, sleep-oriented to family health. An interesting approach Dr. Afolabi-Brown takes to the problem that circulates the internet and advice columns daily. And it is a pleasure to welcome Dr. Funke Afolabi-Brown on Heavy Board today. Funke, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. We like to start this off with kind of, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did you start to form, the early years of your life?
I grew up, I'm from Nigeria. So I grew up in Nigeria in I wouldn't call it a small town, probably a larger sized town called Ibadan. And I am the third of four children. My dad was a civil engineer and also a pastor. He's passed now. My mom, who's also passed, was a librarian and also a serial entrepreneur. So I guess I got some of those traits from her. And it was we had a lot of family, a lot of friends, a lot of just really healthy relationships growing up. And I think a lot of the things that I experienced in my past has shaped my outlook towards life, which is really building relationships and helping people become the best versions of themselves.
That's great. Yeah. When did you come to America?
I came to the U.S. in 2006 after graduating medical school. So I went to medical school in Nigeria. And then right after that, I did 1 year of internship in Nigeria and then relocated with my husband in 2006.
And your husband's from Nigeria as well?
Yes. So we met, we were college sweethearts.
That's fantastic. Yeah. What was that like? I mean, like growing up in Nigeria, especially like kind of the American-centric worldview and all of that, like people, they have no idea, what that is, growing up in Nigeria and then coming to America and especially practicing medicine in kind of both places. Like, what was that like? I mean, just like we don't have to go as detailed or as vague as you want to get in terms of like the immigration process and kind of having to set up shop here with your medical practice and all that?
Yeah. So I would say, of course, here in the US, I would say there's just that culture of, I would say, entitlement. I mean, it's such a blessed country, but there are lots of things that we have access to here that we didn't have access to in Nigeria. Talk about the healthcare and resources and advances in diagnostic technology. I would say the clinicians, a lot of the time, because there were limited resources in terms of diagnostic, strategies and things like that, your clinical skills are stellar because that's sometimes all you're relying on. You diagnose a pneumonia and you do not get a chest x-ray, you make very major clinical diagnosis even with limited resources. So it really helps you to own in those skills, which I feel is different here, where there's just such a pursuit for more testing, which in some situations it's needed, but sometimes we're just practicing more of defensive medicine. So I think that's one big one. And then growing up in a culture where there was more of that close-knit relationship with folks around you, your neighbors, your friends. Here, it could be a little bit isolating, especially if you don't have much family. Fortunately, my siblings are also here, so I have that privilege, and we have quite a lot of friends here. So that's been great. But I would say that transition was a little challenging. Of course, I missed home. But once we started our own family and things, it really, things got better. And, I still get a chance to go to Nigeria from time to time as well. So that's also been very helpful.
Yeah. How did you first get interested in studying sleep? Where did this interest start? It's hardly something that not everybody says, oh, I want to go to medical school for, like sleep study. Well, what did your interest in that start, and what drove you to kind of being interested in studying sleep and kind of the medicine around sleep?
Yeah, so that's so I actually didn't start off studying sleep. I did training in pediatrics to become a pediatrician. And then after that, I did a year of research fellowship after my pediatrics training, because I wanted to do something else than general pediatrics. I wanted to be specialized, and I wasn't really sure of what that looked like. So doing a year of research fellowship where I was mentored by a pediatric pulmonologist and got to do some work with him, that then led me to pursuing a fellowship in pediatric pulmonology. So really around lung disease and things like that, and physiology. And after that, I worked as, an attending as faculty for a few years. And I really started getting interested in sleep because of the way sleep, that's the consistent element in all this, regardless of the disease state or specialization. Sleep is fundamental. So that prompted me to get a training, my sleep fellowship at Penn. And I just fell in love with it. And, that in addition to some of the experiences I had in the past with my own sleep issues and having kids and all of that, I think that motivated me to really want to make this a thing, which really, that's what I say. I help people make sleep a thing. So studying that, understanding the science of it, understanding circadian rhythms, and then being able to take that information and distill it to the general population, because no matter how high achieving I am and how successful I am, if I'm not creating impact with all that information and knowledge, then I haven't really done my job. So that's really what I do. So taking what I've known, what I've experienced, my own knowledge and expertise outside of the four walls of the exam room. So even though I do have a clinical practice now, the Restful Sleep Place, I still speak and teach and hold workshops and conferences just around the topic of sleep health and wellness.
Yeah, it's interesting. And some listeners to this already know this, but my father was a surgeon for like 35 years. He's retired now. But he always talks about, especially when he was training, like being a resident and then a fellow, the sleep is almost non-existent. I know there's different laws around it now from when he was training all those years ago, but he says, 100-hour weeks were nothing. You were doing that regularly, getting 2 hours of sleep at the hospital, not leaving. I imagine that would make anybody very interested in, sleep seems really important. Yeah, absolutely. And you wrote this past October on MGB Health. I was looking up a very interesting column on overcoming your own insomnia, where you kind of talk about using cognitive behavioral therapy for curing your insomnia, or like instilling things like boundaries to protect sleep time, which is, like boundaries is something we talk about on this podcast a lot, like about writing time, like creating boundaries around that, protecting that time. But how does one do this? How did you do it in terms of like overcoming your insomnia?
Yeah, so, I think it was a few things. I mean, back then when I was struggling, we didn't have all this, I didn't necessarily even have the words to explain the strategies I put in place. But now that I know that was what I did, so I'd already started, exploring because I was a physician already. So I knew about insomnia, but, throughout entire medical school career, I think the average physician gets a maximum, if possible, 2 hours of training on sleep.
Yeah.
That's all. That's lucky. That's very generous. Most get close to nothing.
Right.
So it wasn't as if I really understood the science of sleep. But one of the things I struggled with was, racing thoughts. And I would say it wasn't just pure insomnia for me. It was a combination of sleep deprivation and insomnia, which I usually tell people it's two different things. People think it's the same. With sleep deprivation, you're struggling with sleep opportunity, right? So you're just not able to, either you don't get restful sleep because you have a sleep disorder, or most likely you're not getting enough sleep. For me, it was lack of boundaries with work. It was people pleasing. It was also, of course, taking care of a very young baby. All those things caused me to be sleep deprived. But what made it more complicated was even when I was sleep deprived and exhausted, and I had what we call a very high sleep debt or high sleep drive, whenever my head hit the pillow, I still couldn't sleep, which was the insomnia part of it. So it was a very complex, interwoven disorder, right? So really trying to untangle that required me to, again, create space and opportunity to take care of myself, because I realized that was my biggest investment. So a lot of the work I did was initially starting off with the mindset, like what's getting in my way. And then we started to work on those strategies, limiting the time I spend in bed, addressing those cognitive beliefs about what I thought was happening in my sleep, taking on, mindfulness and really looking at minimizing the amount of time I spent in bed and all of that. So those are all just the components at the end of the day of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And also, of course, I read some self-help books and things like that. And it definitely was a game changer for me, and it's helped me to help so many other people.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and the fact that you dedicate kind of your practice to this. I was curious, like, because of creating that time and kind of forcing yourself to cognitive behavioral therapy takes a lot of discipline, like, to really be successful. And I just wanted your thoughts on this. How much does discipline matter when it comes to creating kind of like a sleep pattern or a sleep plan?
I think it's critical, but I think the important thing is starting from where you are, because many times people hear about what they need to do to improve their sleep, and they're just not ready to do that. But one of the things I recommend is that sometimes you may not be able to do the whole thing. Sometimes you may be just so darn tired that you don't have the motivation, but start something, start from somewhere. Instead of laying in bed for 9 hours when you know you can only sleep about 5 hours. Maybe we cut back on that to start. And then once you start to take those little steps and you see that it's giving you results that are desirable, then you can build on from there.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I think about this, and I think about like the average person is probably terrible at creating like sleep patterns. You know, like why are so many people struggle with creating like developing a sleep pattern of their own, or why are some people horrible at creating like a sleep schedule or routine? You know, like it's I don't know if it's just personality or why is that? What have you found in your practice and all of that?
I think it's really sometimes it's we get into habits that now becomes like the spiral. One of the big ones I would say is, it's technology, social media, and I think that gets in our way a lot because you may say, okay, you know what, I'm just going to watch one show on either on the TV or just scroll on social media for 15 minutes, and that becomes 30 minutes. And so when that's now almost like an outlet, especially for busy people, where you're like, okay, I just need some me time, so I'm going to just sit right here and go down on TikTok and things like that. And then all of a sudden 15 minutes becomes 2 hours and you're now annoyed with yourself. So that irregularity sometimes is because of that. The other reason why is that sometimes too, as individuals, we define ourselves by our productivity, right? There's that narrative of, sleep is for suckers and you snooze, you lose, and all of that stuff. And so you're already in a culture where it's like, oh yeah, you got to just work yourself to the bone to show that you're devoted and dedicated to your work. And so that's also something that gets in the way. Another reason might be because, people maybe you need to make ends meet. And so now you're working 2-3 jobs and sleep is always the first thing that's going to suffer. So that's another reason why, you may have to pick on shifts and things like that. And so as a result of that, you're not able to get adequate sleep opportunity.
Yeah, and like in that same article where you listed out your ideal sleep and waking times, and I'm curious why you chose those, kind of 10 p.m. for sleep and 5:30 a.m. for waking, and what would you say is the ideal amount of sleep? Everyone always says 8 hours, but is that true?
Yeah, so I think I always say there's no like perfect sleep schedule. The sleep schedule that's perfect is the one that works for you and helps ensure you get good sleep. So for me, because I'm an early bird, so I wake up super early. So starting my day at 5:30 is just what my body does. I don't even need an alarm. And then, counting backwards, I usually need about 7.5 hours of sleep. So that's where the 10 p.m. comes in, 7.5 hours. So the ideal really number of hours of sleep varies by age, but we do know that in adults, it's about 7 to 9 hours. And again, it varies because it's such a wide variability because everybody is so different, right? Some people need a little bit more, some people need a little bit less. So you have to figure out how much sleep you need. And then that way you can now set a schedule around that. I think one of the other things we always talk about is being consistent with that schedule.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I'm asking this only because sleep seems to have become almost like an internet meme where kind of like, every self-proclaimed guru, with a YouTube channel is talking about it. I'm thinking of like kind of, Andrew Huberman and some of these other kind of health influencer personalities, all these sort of kind of fitness and health space right now. It's just, is that just because of how important sleep actually is? Or like, why do you think everybody's focused on this, especially in the health perspective? Like, it seems like it's like a new thing. Everybody's like, oh, you're not getting enough sleep. Well, that's going to solve, 40% of your problems or something if you just do this. I don't know. Why is that happening?
I think there are various reasons why. I mean, I think people are capitalizing on the fact that there's now sort of an awareness of how important sleep is, which is incredible, which is great, because that's what we've all been trying to, when I say we, within the sleep field, right? We've been trying to get to for decades of helping people understand how important sleep is. So now that has lit a fire under so many people to move this agenda forward. But I think there's a balance because some are now capitalizing on that and using that as almost like a way to scare people into making decisions. And we never want to have people make decisions from a place of fear. So telling you that, oh my goodness, if you have insomnia, you're at risk of having hypertension and diabetes. Like, how is that going to help you sleep better? No, what it's going to help you, what's going to make sure you do is start to buy into all these hacks and programs and supplements because you now have anxiety that's making your sleep worse. So I think there's different schools in this. There are different things that people are doing. Some are really taking advantage, I would say, and really using this to, move their own agenda forward. And some are genuinely trying to create that awareness so people can live the healthier version of themselves.
Yeah, it's always important to remember too, listeners, like, yeah, the Andrew Hubermans, while he is technically, I think he has like a PhD, like he's not a clinical doctor. He's not seeing patients. He's not, seeing the results of people trying this. He's just like looking at studies and purely kind of research stuff. And I have a question about like a kind of hydration too. And that's another thing that's like everywhere with kind of the health influencers and all. Does hydration help with sleeps? Like it seems like it's a remedy for so much, or at least people say it's a remedy for so much. Does hydration help with sleep at all, or?
Well, I would say there are different ways you can look at this. If you're dehydrated, you will be uncomfortable. Your mouth is dry, all of that. You might actually notice if you're very dehydrated, you might actually urinate even more. And so that's an interesting phenomenon. So that's not good. We don't want you dehydrated because then it might impact the quality of your sleep. But then you have to balance that. If you're overhydrated, maybe you're drinking excessive water, then you might wake up in the middle of the night to urinate more frequently, and that's going to disrupt your sleep. So there's a fine balance. The other thing to note is that when you go to sleep, you actually have what we call insensible water losses. So you're through perspiration, sweating, you might be breathing through your mouth. All of those things will make you lose more water, in that sense, more fluid. And so that might make it such that you wake up in the morning feeling fatigued and dehydrated. If you're dehydrated in the morning, you're more likely to feel exhausted. You're more likely to have low energy and low motivation. And so here's where I just bring it in. Drink enough water through the day because it's good to drink water. It's protective for your kidneys. It's protective for so many parts of your body. So that's good. Try to avoid excessive fluid intake close to bedtime so that it doesn't disrupt your sleep. And then when you wake up in the morning, make sure you get enough sleep. So that way, when you wake up in the morning, make sure you get enough fluid. So you drink enough. So that way you don't have that, how sometimes you just feel so fatigued. So that would take care of that. So especially if you had a bad night of sleep, that's actually one of the tips I provide. Like if you had a bad night of sleep, instead of you just like, oh my goodness, I feel so bad, get up, move around, drink a lot of water, and staying hydrated will help perk things up.
Yeah, that's very interesting there too with that. You've called sleep a superpower. What do you mean by that in terms of like sleep being a superpower for people?
So yeah, I like to call sleep a superpower because, again, if you think about our culture, we're working so hard. We want to be the most productive. Athletes are trying, to perform at a very, very high level. Executives want to close in on like the biggest deals. The students want to thrive in school. We want to be the best versions of it. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to do my worst today, right? We want to be the best versions of ourselves. But the investment we put in optimizing sleep sets us up for that success we have during the day. Because during sleep, so many processes are going on. Your brain is actually pretty active with processing things, with consolidating your memory, with learning new skills, with helping with emotion regulation and decision making and working with teams, with keeping you healthy physically. Because if you're sick, you're not going to be able to show up at work. So it ends up being that we invest those, 7 to 9 hours in good quality sleep, and then that sets us up for success for the rest of the day.
Yeah, it's because there's always so much talk. People are like, oh, superfoods, to take this supplement or anything like that. And I wanted to talk to you about sleep aids too. Like I know I have long questions here, sorry, but are sleep aids good? Are they bad? Again, this is something you hear about all the time on the internet, some big health influencers or YouTubers, like what sleep aids would you recommend and how would you use them properly?
Yeah. I don't typically recommend sleep aids. What I believe, which is really part of what I teach in my insomnia program, is that our body has an inherent ability to sleep. So you can rediscover how to sleep, such that at the end of the day, the sleep aid serves more as a band-aid. And there are many side effects. If you think about like some of the antihistamines and things like that, they lead to daytime drowsiness and put people at risk for falls and things like that. So really focusing on optimizing your own sleep, addressing the root cause. So if you want to take a sleep aid, I always say start with whatever it is you want to take. Why? Why do you need it? I can't sleep. Well, why can you not sleep? It might be because you have insomnia, in which case sleep aids are not the first line of treatment for insomnia. Cognitive behavioral therapy is, and in some situations, maybe medications. Do you have sleep apnea? Maybe that's why you have very unrefreshing sleep. So a sleep aid is not going to treat your sleep apnea. Getting a sleep study and treating your sleep apnea either with an oral appliance or CPAP or orthodontics will help. So going to the root cause, going to why is it an issue? And if you apply that approach, there's going to be very few reasons for you to need a sleep aid.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I wanted to ask that because it's like so many people are either self-medicating with sleep aids or something. Obviously, there's like the ones you hear about that are like in movies, like Ambien or something, like the ones that literally just knock you out. But then I think there's even stuff in terms of like marijuana, like stuff that people use, kind of self-melatonin, like stuff you can even get at like, over the counter, at drugstores that you can just take, be done NyQuil and stuff like that. People will just take that. They even advertise it now, right? Like Tylenol PM or something, or like they're selling the NyQuil now. That's just the sleep aid instead of all like the cold medicine, like cocktail. I don't know. I mean, is that, I guess that's part of the culture too. Would you say that just people just want a remedy that they could like rely on or something instead of like dealing with, I don't know. I mean, it's it's really trying to avoid. It's hard. Behavior change is hard. And to be honest, like I don't routinely suggest sleep aids, but I would put sleep aids in one category and maybe prescription sleep medications in another category. Okay.
Because the prescription sleep medications are approved for insomnia. So there are certain situations where people have insomnia and you do need to put them on, a sleep medication, like you said, Ambien or any.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
Of those, right? So I think it's really important when you get to that level that you are, even though you may need to be put on sleep aid, that you are still working on root cause and also making sure you're speaking with someone who's not just going to leave you on these sleep medications for decades. I've had people come to my practice who have been on, trazodone for years, or clonazepam, the benzodiazepines, for years, and they want me to refill it, and I'm like, wait, what? Let's have a conversation. So, and then we start to develop like a protocol to wean them off, which might take months because they've been on it for years, right? So it's not a quick fix. So I think that behavior change is hard and people want a quick fix. That's the main reason. The other type of sleep aids would be things like, the supplements. So, I mean, supplements are good. I think if you think about it, most times we're not eating a well-rounded diet. And so most times, you might need one supplement or two to help you with your overall, just to make sure you're getting all the nutrients that you need. And some of those supplements can actually help sleep. But again, I want us to go from, am I just optimizing my sleep a little bit with this supplement, or am I trying to treat a sleep condition and really try to focus on, again, the root cause and addressing the underlying sleep condition? I think that's really important.
Yeah, and you call this, like, and you say this on your website, and you say this in your practice, where it's a little bit different, obviously, with the holistic approach to this, where so many doctors, and this is all fields, right, not just your own, and don't seem to take a holistic approach to medicine, and it sometimes maybe it leads them astray in terms of diagnoses and such. Why is a holistic approach to medicine better in your practice and your field?
Yeah, I mean, I think just in medicine generally, I am a firm believer that our bodies know how to heal itself, right? And a sleep issue, just like, high blood pressure or high blood glucose, is a symptom of something. So your body saying something is out of alignment, right? So before we try to fix it quickly, either with a medication or whatever, it's important to look back and say, well, what is this body trying to tell me? What is this like nighttime wake-ups trying to tell me? What is this insomnia trying to tell me? What is this waking up with unrefreshing sleep trying to tell me? It's trying to tell you something. And it could be that it's trying to tell you, well, there's underlying anxiety. And so maybe there are things we need to walk through with a therapist or whatever. Or, well, you have restless leg syndrome. And so you're moving all night long and you just really have a hard time settling down, in which case we want to look, is this restless leg syndrome because of a nutritional issue like iron deficiency? So that then starts to take us to, where is this coming from? So I have someone, think about it. You have someone within the traditional practice saying, okay, I'm having this restlessness. Okay, here is an Ambien versus I'm having this restlessness. Okay, let's talk about that. What does that even mean? When are you having restlessness? Is it happening every night? How long has it happened? What medications are you using? What lifestyle changes are you engaging in? Do you drink caffeine before bed? So we're really going in depth to now say, oh, wow, it sounds like you might have, I don't know, maybe iron deficiency. Let's check your iron levels. Let's check your other nutrient levels to see what's going on. And then we're dealing with that rather than putting a Band-Aid on. I mean, you might still need medication, but we want to make sure we know what we're targeting. Then it then gives you that opportunity for more of a personalized approach rather than, oh, here's a group of handouts and here's a prescription. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And you would think that would be more widespread too, in terms of like taking each individual patient into account before you put the blanket prescription or something or that. And obviously, like everyone's different, but the body does function. Like we all have the same organs that do the functions and stuff. So like I understand why people maybe don't do a holistic approach to it, where they just kind of do the science or the textbook, kind of approach. But I wanted to ask you this about that. Like, are some people just better, like going off that, are some people just better sleepers than others? Like, is there like a sleep instinct, so to speak? like what have you noticed in your practice? Is there any truth to that or anything? Like my wife, when we had our first kid, she's about 3 months old now. And like, the first 5 weeks she was doing the typical infant thing where, up every 2 hours, essentially, if that, and then around 5-6 weeks, like she was actually a pretty good sleeper. So I always say like we're kind of on easy mode with the infant there. Like, are some people just better at sleeping? Like I is it just an instinct? Like what, I don't know. What have you seen in your practice with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think it's multifactorial. There's some people who have it a little bit easier. There's some people who are more sensitized to environmental factors. There's some people that are more sensitized to internal factors. So if you have someone who tends to be more, type A, hyper aroused, kind of a little bit more on the anxious side, or a perfectionist, they may actually be more at risk of having something like insomnia compared to someone who's a little bit more laid back, not as intense. So there are few traits we see. in terms of how people's sleep presents. And then there are also things that may have happened when folks are younger, right? Was there trauma? Was there some kind of severe illness that's now putting you more at risk for the sleep struggles? So that's really where a detailed history also comes in. And then another thing I tell people, I have parents who come in and say, oh, yes, this my 4-year-old has always been a bad sleeper within the earshots of the child. And the parent is like, but even I was a bad sleeper because my mom always told me I was a bad sleeper. So you can hear, I'm not saying it's all word, the kind of things we say, but then you can now imagine what that sets in that 4-year-old. Oh, I'm a bad sleeper, so yeah, I guess this is what I do. So there's that element as well. What are we telling ourselves? What are the narratives we're telling ourselves? And so this is where in cognitive behavioral therapy, especially with the insomnia program that I offer my clients, we're going back to, what are the thoughts you have about your sleep? Yeah, I'm a bad sleeper. Okay, let's go through that. Where is the evidence? What does that even mean? And how is that impacting the results you're seeing? Right? So there's that element as well. So you can see that there are a few things. There are some genetic traits that put you more. We're noticing there are a few genetic factors that may predispose you more to insomnia. Not really, really strong. The data is not as strong. There's that. But then there's environmental factors. Again, I call them the other things like psychosocial and internal factors. And then there's also the narrative and the sort of, I would say, more of the cognitive factors and the stories we're telling ourselves that puts us at risk versus others.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. Because it just seems so wide ranging too, with kind of and maybe it is something just narrative. This is kind of a writing podcast, so we love narrative on this podcast, and I always feel like the stories we tell ourselves are almost more important than even what it was like, oh, what is the truth? It's like, oh, what's the story you're telling yourself? Is that true or not? Because that tends to affect us more than anything else. And I have a few more sleep questions before we get to your book and all that too. But blue light, this is another one, like a trend, a meme all over the internet, health influencers. What do we know about blue light and what it does to your sleep? What is it bad? Is it bad for us? Everybody's staring into screens all day. What do you know about blue light, and what do you see that, like, as it affects sleep and stuff in your practice and your expertise and all that?
Yeah, it's a wide range. I would say, yeah, we do know that blue light is a wavelength. There's a type of light wavelength that has been shown to delay sleep onset mildly. I think the way the research is, you get one study that shows something and everybody just runs to the extremes with it and say, oh yeah, you're awake all night because you were on your phone. It's possible, but it may not necessarily be. And now there's been a lot more work in this area. Michael Gradisar and some other colleagues have really been looking at this, and it's beyond the blue light impact suppressing, because your brain makes a melatonin, which is the hormone of darkness that's produced in the evening. Now that process is determined by the presence or absence of certain light wavelengths of light. So your brain perceives that it's bright out, and that triggers melatonin suppression. Your brain perceives that it's dark out, and it promotes melatonin production. When the brain perceives blue light, it doesn't know that it's artificial light. It just knows this is light. That means I should be suppressing that melatonin production. But beyond that, because a lot of the studies that said, okay, by how much does this exposure to blue light, how much does it delay sleep onset? And honestly, I'm not sure I can't remember what the specific number is off the top of my head, but it's a difference of a few minutes. It's not like, oh my goodness, 3 hours because I looked at my phone before bed. On the other hand, what is more likely to delay sleep onset is more of the content of what you're consuming. So if you're on there scrolling, watching reels, exciting reels on TikTok, or seeing people living their best lives, on social media, that is more likely to create an emotion in you, increase that, give you that dopamine jolt. give you that feeling of, oh my goodness, I'm not that great. Imagine now going to bed feeling like everybody else is living their best lives, but you're more likely to stay awake for 3 hours because of that, not just because of the blue light. Or you're watching really graphic content, disturbing news, you're more likely to stay awake because of the content you consume, not just the blue light. So I think those would be the big pieces. And then, a lot of these, devices, social media, they're designed to keep us on there. That's how we are the commodity, right? You are the product.
Yeah.
So the goal is that how long can we keep this person engaged to displace whatever time we need to displace to just keep them on. So that's another way by which, that addiction to screen time can impact your sleep.
Yeah, that's very interesting too. Yeah, that it actually has more effect based on what content than the actual light, because it's becoming something like, and I work in a setting where I'm on a screen all day, for my job, and it's your eyes, you start to feel it in your eyes and stuff, staring into that light for so long. Even if you dim the screen all the way down, which I do, like it still is after 8 hours is kind of, wow, this is insane. But it's fascinating that that's the content matter. And I call social media, like I refer to it, listeners know this, as addiction software. That's what it's designed for. It's designed to addict you to it and barely do very little else, But yeah, that's very interesting with the blue light. Moving to the book too. I was looking up your book and all that, and I was curious of your thoughts. And this is a podcast where we like to talk about these sorts of things, and we're just curious about writers. Like, why did you choose to self-publish this book? Was that the best option for you? Did you try to get it traditionally published? Was the book turned down? We're very curious about these sorts of questions on this podcast, and it's rough out there in terms of the publishing industry too. And I was just thinking, with somebody with your reputation, your credentials, your practice, I was just like, why did you choose to go the self-publishing route? How did that work out?
Yeah, I decided to go the self-publishing route because I'd set a goal for myself at the beginning of the year that I would have a book in people's homes by the end of the year. And one of the things I knew would be a limiting factor to doing that was finding, a publishing company that would, take it on right away.
Right.
And also I wanted to ensure that what I wanted, the message I wanted out there was the message that was out, that was not a limiting factor. So it was purely because of that. My next book, I'll probably go through a publisher and things like that and do the traditional route. But this was the main thing. I needed it. I needed to get a word out there, and I had a message, and I wanted to make sure that nothing got in my way. Because for me personally, it would be very easy to procrastinate and say, okay, well, hopefully next year. And I did not want that to happen. So that was the pure reason why.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we love that on this podcast too, with the kind of, because when you go traditional route, it's okay, well, now it takes 4 years, like 4 years to get that from the time you hand it in to the time it comes out. And, you're on to the next book, or something changed in the research suddenly, and it clouds everything out. But just the way that it's much easier to do that now via Amazon or something than it's ever been before. So I love that you've taken it into your own hands. I guess liability as well when you're doing nonfiction. I'm not as familiar with kind of nonfiction or research books as in the publishing kind of side of things. Was that a factor at all in terms of like, you have to have the lawyers go over everything, and if you talk bad about a drug or something in the book, right, and then all of a sudden the drug company's knocking on the door of the publishing house being that you can't publish that, was that a factor at all, or?
No, it wasn't at all. That wasn't, I made sure one of the things I did was I was very as unbiased as possible. So I wasn't promoting a medication. I think, again, because my approach is very holistic, versus, here's the list of medications. I gave the information. These are medications that are FDA approved, that are out there. This is what it is. If you want to do things a different way, this is what you need to do. And so, and then of course, the normal verbiage, this is all for informational purposes, those disclaimers and things like that. And so that worked really nicely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. What was the process like for you writing this book? Obviously, you spent many years doing the research. You have your clinical practice and stuff that you do. What was your process like for sitting down to get this book together? And what did you want to get, the message to everybody?
The message I wanted to get to everybody is the experience they were having, especially parents. I wanted to validate it. It wasn't in their head. They're not lazy. There are actual sleep disorders that's getting in the way of your child being able to sleep and you being able to sleep, because there's information out on there in there also for parents. And so that was the message, to say that this is an issue. There is such a thing as what you're describing that nobody seems to understand, or you couldn't even put words to. This is what it is, probably. These are things you need to look out for so that you can advocate and speak to your physician, because all I'm giving you is information or words that you can use to then describe what you're feeling so that you can get the help you need.
Yeah. And I like that approach too, because people that don't have families and listeners that out there that don't, like your approach to it, where it's this holistic kind of like the entire family unit is affected by even just one child or one parent not being able to sleep. And like I think that if you don't have a family, you don't understand that dynamic either, that like kind of everybody is connected in this, the same household. It isn't just like having a roommate, like this is about, it's much deeper than that. So it's, yeah, I haven't seen anybody approach it the way you are in that sense, in terms of the family-oriented sense of this too, especially, I guess because your background is pediatrics, but it's still very interesting to approach it in that way. Like, again, like, that's why I was curious about, like, I was like, man, nobody wanted to take this on. Like, that's a very unique way to approach this and put out into the world in terms of sleep, especially considering like the trend now with kind of everybody obsessed with sleep. Yeah. How did you come to that kind of like, I guess it was just, having a family, right? That like you were figured that out. I mean, like, actually, if my kid's not sleeping, I'm not sleeping. Or if like, I'm not sleeping, I'm not like able to be there, or I'm forgetting things. I'm not staying on schedule. What is your writing routine like when you sit down to do something like this, or you're writing an article or anything? Do you do weekly, daily? How do you fit that into your schedule with everything else you have going on?
Yeah, so my most productive times usually early in the morning. So I just built that in. And so at different seasons in my life, depending on what I'm working on, the tasks I assign myself during those morning hours will change, right? When I was in medical school, or when I was, preparing for my board exams, it was study, right? When I was, studying during my training, it was studying, right? So now what I do, like, I also have, I have social media and YouTube, all these other outlets. So it's using that time to make sure I create content that is valid and evidence-based. So those are things. And then when it was time to write the book, I just filled that time up with writing. So I would wake up early in the morning, do my morning routine, which is really important, just to set myself up for the day. And then just sit, and maybe sometimes it may be an hour, sometimes it may be, 2 hours, and just write. So started off with, an outline, and then from there really started to build around the outline. And then, from there gained momentum. I would say the initial parts were hard because I needed to be very clear on the takeaway, which is, what do I want people to take from this book, right? I didn't want it to be just another book, because if you Google sleep books online, there are thousands, right?
Yeah.
There's so many people that have written, like you said. And I wanted it to be something that a family wasn't, because most people, for sleep on kids, most people tend to write within one age range, which is fine. So maybe that initial infancy, first couple of years of life. But then they're preschool kids, they're school-age children, they're teenagers, young adults, and parents that still continue to struggle with sleep. So what happens to them? So I needed to bring that in. And like you said, the family is a unit, one child not sleeping, which I noticed in my clinical practice, and from people that had reached out to me either by email or on social media to say, our home is just, we're struggling as a home, we're struggling as a family just because of this one child's sleep. And so that helped me kind of see things from the perspective as a mom as well, who had gone through, sleep issues with our child as well and things like that. So that helped me to really connect to help people connect the dots to say, well, let's get your child sleeping because that's probably impacting your sleep significantly.
Yeah, and that's so interesting too, because and we like to ask these questions on this type of podcast where we how has the book launch been going? I know it only came out in October here this year, but it's just kind of how has that been? Because we're the type of podcast where we like you're the first one we've had on where it's done like actual clinical research in your book and stuff. Where it's more we've had nonfiction writers that have done this, but like more of a science based or holistic medicine based approach. How has that gone? I know you have to do it all yourself, right? You have to hire the media team. You have to schedule the appearances yourself, like all of this stuff. How has that been going so far? I know it's only been a few months, but.
Yeah, it's been incredible. It's been a lot of hard work, but I think one of the things my mentor says, as a pediatrician, you've put needles in the back of a 1 kg, 100 gram baby. You could do this. So I've done some really hard things. So this is one of those things you do. And my commitment to families just kept me going, my own story. And this is a book I wish I had when I was raising kids, right? So I felt like I wrote to my younger self, who was burnt out, struggling, professional, feeling like I was failing on all ends, even though I was rising very rapidly on the ladder of success, right? And I couldn't get the sleep thing right. So I wrote to her, and I think that kept me going. And so my message, that also drove my mission to get the word out. So yes, I had to get a launch team together, really get very active on social media, schedule meets, book tours, visit libraries, talk to schools. I had a book writing team, so they helped me also with just the implementation overall of these things. So it wasn't like I was running around doing this all by myself. And so it was, the launch was extremely successful. People really took to it, and it's just been great.
Yeah, that's fantastic too. Yeah, we love hearing success stories with that. Doing it all yourself too, like. Yeah, and we like to ask these kind of writing questions too, these last couple of questions. Like, what advice would you give to somebody who was trying to start out doing this or starting to maybe write their own book on their own research or start their own kind of clinical practice like you have and all that? What advice would you give to people out there?
I would say there's magic at the end of your obedience, because I feel like being asked, I'm a woman of faith, so doing this was more of like me saying yes to something, right? I was instructed to do this, is how I took it, because it was almost like a mission, right? So if you don't do it, you'll never know what would happen. I didn't know this book was going to be so successful. I mean, I knew it was going to impact lives, but to see just how well received it's been so far, and it's just been released, I would never have known that if I didn't do it, if I moved it again to next year and then got busy with something else. So you will never know, and be willing to bet on yourself. If you have a dream that's been put in your heart, as long as you're willing to do the work, just go ahead and do it.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And the final question we like to ask every writer that comes on here and every guest, really, what are you working on now? What's taking up your time? Are you doing another book? Are you just the clinical stuff, family time? What's taking up all your time right now?
Yeah, I think it would be a combination of, my kids, my husband, my family is my why, right? My community, my friends. So investing in that, because my kids are growing up. My son's 16 now, and we're counting down, the clock started. So really making sure I'm present to the best of my ability, and also building my practice. My practice is one of the few practices that's really majorly focused on pediatric sleep issues. Of course, we see adults as well, but I also have, virtual. So I see patients virtually. So I'm seeing patients across multiple states. And so I want to continue to build that. I want to continue to give people that access to be able to get their sleep conditions addressed. So that's really what's taking up a ton of my time right now.
That's great. That's great. And I know we're bumping up against the time here. We're already over, but thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find your stuff? Where can they find your practice, social media, all of that? Let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. So I would say my website is a good place to start. It's restfulsleepmd.com. That's restfulsleepmd.com, one word. And then social media, I'm at Restful Sleep MD as well. I'll keep it simple for everybody, as well as on Facebook, Restful Sleep MD. My YouTube channel is Dr. Funke Brown. I think it's a Dr. Funke Brown show. If you put that up, I think I'll pop up. But those are places to find me. The book's on Amazon. You can also learn about the book on my website as well. So those are just ways to reach me.
That's fantastic. And that's all linked below as well, listeners, in the description. Funke, thank you so much. This was a pleasure to meet you. Please come back.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom,
Heavy.
I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.